Want to know one of the reasons why I live in Houston, Texas? Because it is warm most of the time. Because one of the things I cannot stand is the frigid cold, and neither could H.P. Lovecraft. And I think we have a pretty good idea why. Hey, what's up, bookworms and elder ones? I am Mike, coming to you live from Miskatonic University today to talk a little Mountains of Madness, and At the Mountains of Madness by Mr. H.P. Lovecraft. Guys, I have been a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan for the longest time. I can't even talk about all the merch that I have from this man. He is a pop culture icon, and it seems like people can't stop talking about him either negatively or positively, especially lately. There's a show on HBO right now that has really just reignited interest or criticism of him, one way or the other. I'm here to talk about his books. If you want to know why I became such a big Lovecraft fan, I did do that video a while back on why I think that you should probably try reading his stuff, and I feel like that's kind of gone over positively. And I do want to say up front that the reason that I picked the 3 Lovecraft stories I'm going to do this month, which are At the Mountains of Madness, Shadow over Innsmouth, and Dunwich Horror, is because everyone's done Call of Cthulhu. Okay, everyone has reviewed that, and I feel like even people who don't read Lovecraft know about Cthulhu, right? They either have a coffee mug, or they have a t-shirt, or they have a stuffed animal, or something like that. Cthulhu is a pop culture reference, so everybody gets this point. So that's why I'm not doing this one. My favorite H.P. Lovecraft story is The Color Out of Space, and I already did that review with the movie review a while back. So that's why I picked the 3 that I picked this month. But let's go ahead and talk about At the Mountains of Madness. 1931 is when it was written, but it was rejected by Weird Tales magazine due to its length. At the time, Lovecraft really had only wrote 20, 30-page short stories, really. I mean, that's really what him and Robert E. Howard and Algernon Blackwood, people like that, were doing at that time. There were no long novels or anything like that when they were doing the Weird Tales, as they put it. So it kind of just sat on ice, pun intended, for 5 years, and then it was serialized in 1936 in Astounding Stories and compiled later, because it's about 120 pages, which is basically a novella. But, you know, for Lovecraft, that was basically a novel, right? Because, again, he was only doing really short stories. But like I said, it feels like so many people just can't stop talking about him recently. This was the first Lovecraft story I ever read, because what I said in that video about why you should read him was at the high school library is where I discovered him, just due to Stephen King talking about him all the time. That was what piqued my interest at the time. I had become a recent constant reader as a 15-year-old. I had kind of just burned through all his stuff, and he always in his interviews talked about H.P. Lovecraft being a big influence for him. So of course I went and looked him up, and in my library they had that was the biggest one. I was like, okay, well, that's the only one that looks like a book. It's not just a collection. So I checked out At the Mountains of Madness and was just kind of in awe at what I felt, and kind of felt like it was part of a bigger world, much like how King has the multiverse. And this is when I learned about the Cthulhu mythos, which was his connected universe through all of these tales. So I read it in 1993 and again a couple months ago, and we're going to talk about it now. And we're going to begin, as we always do, by talking about what is it about, guys. At the Mountains of Madness details the events of a disastrous expedition to the Antarctic continent in September of 1930. It talks about what was found there by a group of explorers led by the narrator, Dr. William Dyer of Miskatonic University. Dyer details the story of a small group of geologists, aviators, and explorers in search of unique rock specimens. While there, however, they encounter several horrors, including unearthing ancient specimens known as the Old Ones, and a decadent ancient city built by the Old Ones themselves. And that leads us to the Mountains of Madness, guys. So it is a very good entry point, I think, just going off of my own experience. But again, we're going to get into that with what makes it good or bad. Look, no one could set the tone for the truly weird and horrible like HP. I do think that his writing style kind of depends on you. But with this, I felt like on this reread, this guy just has that talent to set a sense of dread from go. You already know from the way that the story is framed, this expedition did not have a good ending, because it's all about this Mr. Dyer telling other people, do not go there. I need you to stay away because this is what happened. And you notice all of us didn't come back. So you obviously know that this is going to have a pretty bad ending. And if you've read any Lovecraft before, I mean, I hadn't, but if you've read any Lovecraft before, you know it's probably going to end bloody somehow. It's going to end that way. It's not going to be oh well, they got lost in the snow and they froze to death. No, it's nothing that charming. It's not. So again, you're being told this from the. And I think that interesting that I found is what a lot of H.P. Lovecraft stories is. He will use an unnamed narrator. So this time he's actually using names. And I think it's because you have a lot of dialogue between the characters that you didn't have in a lot of his other short stories. But I'll address that when we get to Shadow over Innsmouth and Dunwich Horror. But like I said, this expedition doesn't end well. So you really just have this bad feeling and just foreboding right here the whole time you're reading it. And again, you feel that sense of dread almost right away. I mean, they're just like in the plane, or you're talking to the person in the plane, and you're just like, what's going to happen? What bad is going to happen to this person? What's going on the other end of this radio, right? But I love that feeling of incredible discovery, and that feeling of having to keep going. This is why I love science fiction novels, because I am an absolute space nerd, not part as much as maybe the science of it, because I'm not this nutso about math, but the actual, just the idea of exploring space has always been just super fascinating to me ever since I was a young child. I think most Gen Xers feel that way. We were obsessed with space and astronauts and NASA and stuff like that. So I think we've always kind of had that feeling. And I feel like this is the way to do it, because Antarctica is basically like an alien world to us, because it's too frigid and too cold for us to explore for long. So this expedition, they have this ticking clock. They have to finish this during what is considered the summer months in Antarctica before it's just, inhabitable. They can't be there or they will die due to the cold. So H.P. Lovecraft had a severe phobia of cold. I mean, everybody talks about how just crazy this guy was. I think he's a guy who lived in fear most of his life, and he put that fear onto page to make sure that he could get that fear to us, right? And he does that very well, because like I said, I already don't like the cold. This maybe be like, yeah, I never want to go past like Iowa. I have no interest in visiting up north, because here in Houston, if it gets below like 60, I'm like, it's too damn cold outside. People are like, it feels great. I'm like, no, take your ass to Minnesota, right? But it really does exemplify not only his fear of the cold, but also it sets that ticking clock, because they are on a limited time that they could be here before things go nasty. And that's before we even know about the nasties that they do find in this, as they keep heading further and further inland and finding out that there aren't such nice things there. And I don't want to give away the creepy crawlies in this. Look, if you know anything about Lovecraft, you know that there's tentacles, you know that there's going to be creepy, slimy, crawly things with sharp teeth and things like that. And I think that this is really good, because it gives us our first look of the Shoggoths, or sometimes they're called Shaggoths. I've always heard them called Shoggoths, but you get your first real look at that. They have been hinted at in other Lovecraft stories, as well as the debut of the Necronomicon, something that is very, very big in the Cthulhu mythos. So I really feel like that makes this a good place to start if you haven't really got in him, even though it is his longest story to read. But if there's some bad here, I said this in my Something Wicked review that I did yesterday. I think that I'm going to do this probably with all these books that are older, is the writing style can be a little tough to get into. His prose is very flowery, and there is times where you might feel like you're reading somewhat of a science report. It does get very, very technical on some of the details, and that might be hard for some people to get through at first. But again, it's just a very, very dry, no more so than like a Tolkien, but it is very, very dry writing style. But for me, like I said, it was setting that sense of dread real early that it didn't bother me as much. But if you're going from reading something that was written in 2016 and then you flip right back to this, which was 85 years before that, it might be a little bit jarring to you. It might be a little tough to read. But I think it's one of those things after a dozen or so pages, you're going to get used to it and you're going to be fine. It might just know that you might feel a little confused at first. And I'm not convinced necessarily that wasn't put there on purpose, because he likes to give you a little bit of disorientation as you're going into his stories. But again, that might just be hindsight. Who knows? I also, like I said, I feel like a lot of times the technical jargon does kind of bring it down a bit to where you are going to feel like, why am I reading about this biology exam right now? And again, that might be, this is a group of scientists, so he doesn't want to just be like, hey, I'm a scientist and I got a beaker, ha ha ha. No, he didn't want to just be kind of just absolutely dumbing it down for that sake. Obviously, he did his homework, and he did consult with a lot of people before he did stuff like this. So he's going to write that into his story. I don't have a problem with it, but I can see a lot of people reading it and be like, why do I feel like I'm doing homework right now? So that is, I think, one of the downfalls of reading a longer story from H.P. Lovecraft instead of one of his usual 25 to 35 page stories that you might have become accustomed to. But guys, I'm going to get in now why you should read it. Again, I think this is a great starting point. A question I get asked a lot is, where should I start with H.P. Lovecraft? And I'm like, well, look, if length don't matter, and again, it's not long. It's like 120 pages, but it just, for that time period, that was considered, long with the weird tales. So I think it's a great starting point because, like I said, it sets up the Shoggoths, it sets up the older ones, it sets up the Necronomicon, a lot of stuff that was world building for him. It even has the first mentions of Cthulhu in it. So I think that it's one of those things where if you're kind of trying to put together a chronological kind of order for this is a great place to start, because this really is about the old ones and how, they've been here a lot longer than us, So I think it's a great place for you to start if the length doesn't bother you. Connections. It has so many connections to so many other stories. I already mentioned Cthulhu, but there's a ton within the entire mythos that he created. And this isn't into the multiverse, so I'm not going to list all those. But just know, while I was reading, I was like, oh, wow, I don't remember. It talks about this, talks about it. At least 6 other stories I could think of that there are connections or mentions of characters from some of those stories that I think that you'll find very enjoyable if you're reading it after you've probably read a lot of his other stories. But again, if you want to start here, I think it's a great place to do so. As far as my rating scale, I'd probably give this one a 6. This is the rating scale in case you missed it. I'd probably give this one a 6 because, look, it's going to be in your head for a little bit because the ending does go quite to crazy town. It's very it's not non-descriptive about what happens. So I think that you might have a little bit of, I don't want to eat calamari again for a while kind of feeling to it. I might not be interested in seafood whatsoever. I always kind of get that feeling when I get the Lovecraft tentacles. You kind of start to feel like that. But squids, things like that, snakes, no thanks. But so it's going to be in your head for a little bit, but it's nothing that's going to make you just have like straight nightmare feeling. You're going to be like scared. I think that it has some things that might make you a little squeamish, but you're not going to squirm to get through it. So is it scarier than Something Wicked This Way Comes? I think so. Anytime you're dealing with creepy crawlies, as I call them, you're going to get a little kind of creeped out by that. And that was what Lovecraft was so good at, and that's why we're still talking about his stories 100 years later. But again, nothing that you're going to struggle to be able to get through. Final thoughts here is I've always loved like I said, exploring the unexplored. That's always been great. That's why I love science fiction so much. So the fact that you could actually take that, transfer it onto our own planet, which makes it right away feel so much more real than, hey, we're exploring something, billions of light years away. This is something not that far away, and it makes it more frightening to think, holy hell, there's these things that have been here longer than us, and now that they're waking up, we might be in some serious shit, right? So that really kind of made it kind of freaky to me. But again, like I said, Antarctica just feels, it's amazing to just get that feeling like it's just an alien world, and it's right there, and it's just, we don't know that much about it. It just makes this all the more believable. And I feel like the horror and slaughter are, I know I gave this a 6 on my scale, but I do feel like as far as his stories go, besides maybe Color Out of Space, this one's probably turned to the 11 the most as far as, the slaughter of human beings in it. It's pretty violent, and you think about the time period this came out, it was probably like, I can see, if it wasn't because they thought that that the story was too long, they might have thought, I don't know if people were ready for this in 1931, right? I think there might be some of that. I talk about that with the Universal, Frankenstein, Dracula, those movies, The Mummy, the 1920s, 1930s ones, because you think that, man, there were people like freaked out and running out of theaters, because of those. You might look at them now and be like, that's scary. Just think about where we were as a society in the 20s and 30s. Yeah, it was probably pretty damn terrifying. So I always like to look at things through that lens of when it was released, and I think that's what helps me get that feeling of what these books were like to audiences reading them back then. But look, this is the story that made me fall in love with this universe that he created. This really kind of set me on that path, and it made me seek out all of his other works, and that is how I became the fan that I am now. So guys, I think that you will enjoy it if you give it a try. Like I said, if you've been like, I want to get into Lovecraft, I'm not sure where to start, I think it's a great place to do so. If you want something a little shorter, I'm always going to say The Color Out of Space, because it's a story that I feel like has been, people have taken influential liberties with it a lot. It feels like it's been copied a lot, so that's why I always will go back to that one. But this is something truly unique that I think maybe John Carpenter's The Thing might be the closest thing that kind of comes to this. But make that decision for yourself. So guys, definitely check it out and watch out for tentacles. And I'll talk to you guys in the comments.